Hi everybody! So today we're going to be talking a little bit more about slopes of lines. If you think back to chapter 3, we learned a little bit about slope already. So we're going to start by reviewing what we already know, and then we're going to learn some new stuff about slope that's going to help us in this chapter. So in chapter 3, we said slope is the ratio or the fraction of rise over run. We use the letter M for slope because the slope tells us how to move between points on a graph. So we use the letter M. And again, the slope tells us how to move between points on a graph so that we can use the slope to make more points once we know where to start. Now, if we do have a graph, then when we find the slope, we know we're going to write the ratio of rise over run. Now we can choose either one. We can choose either one of these points to start with. I'm going to choose to start with this point over here. Now from there, I need to figure out how to get to this point. So I'm going to start by looking at whether I need to go up or down. That's the rise. Since I need to go down 2 spaces, the rise would be -2, meaning I went down 2 spaces. And the run would be going right 2 spaces. So the run would be +2 because I went to the right 2 spaces. After we write down those numbers, it's very important that we always reduce or simplify that fraction. So since -2 divided by 2 is -1, I would write -1 as my final answer. Now we also said that you can tell whether your slope should end up being positive, negative, undefined, or 0 by looking at a graph. So a positive slope is going to be a slope where when you look at the graph, you see that the line goes uphill when you look at the graph from left to right. When you look at a graph and it looks like the line goes downhill when you go from left to right, that would be a negative slope. So it would look like this. And again, that's because we're looking from left to right. An undefined slope would be any kind of vertical line. So whenever you see a vertical line, the slope is always undefined. And whenever you see a horizontal line, the slope is always 0. So on a graph, you would look for a horizontal line. And anytime the line is horizontal, the slope is 0. Now for those last 2 options, we said Vuxhoy can really help us here because we know that vertical lines, when we write out the word Vux, have an undefined slope. That's what that middle letter stands for. So vertical lines have an undefined slope and horizontal lines have a slope of 0. And that's what that middle letter stands for, is that the slope is 0. Now this works out great when you have a graph, but in this chapter we're going to be starting with a graph and we're going to be trying to write the equation of a line. Or we're going to be starting with ordered pairs and we're going to be trying to write the equation of a line. So the next thing we need to learn, and this is the new thing we're going to learn about slope, is how do you find the slope of a line when you have 2 points? So 2 different ordered pairs without having a graph in front of you. And we have a formula to help us do this. So the formula that we use to find the slope of a line when we have 2 ordered pairs instead of a graph is this: y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now let me explain what this means a little bit. The little number 2's and the little number 1's tell you which ordered pair to look for. Do I look at the first ordered pair? That would be number 1. Or the second ordered pair? That would be number 2. The y's and the x's tell me which coordinate to look for. So I know that in an ordered pair, the first number is always the x coordinate and the second number is always the y coordinate. So this is taking the x coordinates and subtracting. And this is taking the y coordinates and subtracting. So let's go through an example of how I would use these two specific ordered pairs to figure out the slope. The first thing that I like to do is I like to label which one of these numbers is which variable. So, because this is the first ordered pair, I'm going to put x1 over the first number and y1 over the second number. And the reason I'm going to do that is because the x is always first and the y is always the second number. And these are both the first ordered pairs, so they both have a 1. In the second ordered pair, I'm going to write x2 and y2, because the first number here would be the x coordinate of the second ordered pair, and the next number would be the y coordinate of the second ordered pair. Now I'm just going to fill those numbers in to my formula. So the formula starts with y2. So if I look at these numbers, y number 2 is -5. Then the formula has a minus, and then I'm going to fill in y number 1, which is a 3. Now I'm going to look at the x coordinates. So I'm going to start with x number 2, which is a 1, minus, and then I'm going to look at x number 1, which is a -2. Now you'll notice I ended up with a minus and a negative in a row here. And the reason for that is because there's a minus in the formula and there's a negative by this number. Now we simplify. So -5 minus 3 would be -8. A minus and another minus turn into a plus. And 1 plus 2 is 3. Now 8 and 3 cannot be reduced. They don't divide nicely. They have no common factors. So this is my final answer. All right, let's try this a few more times just to get used to using the formula and how this works. So, in the next example, I'm sorry, I have like a little bit of a cough today. In the first example here, it says, find the slope of a line that passes through the following points. So first, we're going to find the slope. Then classify the slope as either positive, negative, 0, or undefined based on our results. So there are really two steps to these problems: finding the slope and then classifying the slope. Okay, let's try the first problem. Again, I like to label before I start filling in numbers. So I'm going to have x number 1, y number 1, x number 2, y number 2. Now, I would strongly suggest, because we do need to memorize this formula and we need to know it by heart. I'm not going to tell it to you like on the test or anything like that. Because you need to know it by heart, I would strongly suggest you write the formula every single time you do a problem, at least for a little while, because that will help you remember it. So my formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Now, if I look back to how I labeled, y number 2 is -1, minus y number 1 is 2. X number 2 is -4, minus x number 1 is 5. Now I'm going to simplify. -1 minus 2 is -3, -4 minus 5 is -9, and -3 divided by -9 simplifies to 1/3, and that would be my final answer. Now you may feel free to use a calculator here, especially if the arithmetic you want to be sure that you got it right, or if, for example, you have trouble simplifying your fraction. That's totally fine. Use a calculator to do that. Let's try number 2. Oh, sorry, second part of the problem. Classify it as positive, negative, 0, undefined. This is a positive number. That both of these negatives together cancel and make a positive. So my second part of my answer would be that this is a positive slope. All right, now, problem number 2. I'm going to fill in my formula first. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. I'm going to label because it helps me keep track of what's what. So x number 1, y number 1, x number 2, y number 2. And now I'm going to find my slope. So y number 2 is -3 minus y number 1 would be 5. X number 2 would be 1/2 minus x number 1 would be 9/2. Now I'm going to simplify. Negative 3 minus 5 is negative 8, and 1/2 minus 9/2 is negative 4. If you have any questions about how I got negative 4 there, you can always use your calculator and type in 1/2 minus 9/2 and see what you get. You do get negative 4. Now negative 8 divided by negative 4, both of those negatives are going to cancel and we get a positive 2. So that's my slope. Since we get a positive number, again we would write the word positive to classify it. Now problem number 3 looks a little bit different. And the reason we wanted to show you problem number 3 here is because the notation is different, but the process is the same. Just like I labeled here x1, y1, x2, y2, when I look at function notation, the x is still the first number. It's the number inside of the parentheses. So I'm going to label x1. And the 6 would be y1. x2, y2. So it's the same way I did this problem. X is first, y is second. It's just a slightly different notation. Instead of writing it in an ordered pair, they used function notation. So now I'm going to do m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Y number 2 is 4 minus y number 1 is 6. X number 2 is 4 minus x number 1 is negative 2. Now you'll notice again I ended up with 2 negatives in a row because there's a minus in the formula and the number I plugged in was negative. And now I'm going to simplify. 4 minus 6 is negative 2. 2 minuses make a plus. And 4 plus 2 is 6. Now this time when I simplify this, I get negative 1/3. And so my answer here, my final answer is still a negative number. So next to that, I would write the word negative and put a box around it for classifying. Let's try another one. So in this problem, I would write x1, y1, x2, y2, same as I did with an ordered pair, it's just function notation. My formula would be y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And now I'm just going to plug in my numbers. So y number 2 is 1 minus y number 1 is 5. X number 2 is 3 minus x number 1 is 3. So when I simplify this, I get negative 4 divided by 0. Now, if you try to type in on your calculator negative 4 divided by 0, your calculator is going to say the word error. Because in math, you cannot ever divide by 0. Your 0 can never be in the denominator. So when you get error like that, when you try to simplify this and it doesn't work because you can't divide by 0, your answer here would be undefined. Let's look at one more example, number 6. So in number 6, we go back to ordered pairs. I'm going to label x1, y1, x2, y2. I'm going to use my formula, so m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1, and I'm going to plug in my numbers. So y2 is 4 minus y1 is 4. x2 is negative 3 minus x1 is 0. So I get 0 divided by negative 3. Now if you type in 0 divided by negative 3 on your calculator, you get 0. So you would write 0 as your final answer, and you would classify this as a 0. Now some students get very confused because they go, hey, I thought you weren't allowed to have a 0 in problem number 4, but then you were allowed to have a 0 in problem number 6. What's the difference? The difference is that the 0 in problem number 4 is in the denominator, and the 0 in problem number 6 is in the numerator. The numerator is okay. 0 divided by something is just 0. But the denominator is not. You cannot have a 0 in the bottom. So I'm going to teach you a little bit of a memory trick to help you remember how to do this so that you don't get confused about which one is undefined and which one is 0. When I say, where can I use 0? If it's in the numerator, it is okay. If it's in the denominator, it is N-O. This is no, the zero is in the bottom, and this is okay, the zero is in the top. So to help you remember where you're allowed to have a zero and where you're not, you can remember okay versus N-O. All right, we're going to do one more problem, and then I promise that's it. We're going to look at a table of values now. So instead of giving you two ordered pairs like I did here, I'm going to give you a table. But the good news is we can do this the same way. We're just going to choose two sets of ordered pairs from the table. Now, in the table, they already labeled which column is X and which column is Y. So this would be X1, and this would be Y1. This would be X2, and this would be Y2. It does not matter which of these ordered pairs you pick. You pick any two you like. So I would have Y2 minus Y1 over X2 minus X1. And now, Y2 would be negative 9 minus Y1 would be negative 6. X2 would be negative 1 minus X1 would be negative 2. And let's simplify. So negative 9, 2 minuses make a plus. Plus 6 would be negative 3. Negative 1, 2 minuses make a plus. Negative 1 plus 2 would be 1. And that simplifies to negative 3. So my answer would be negative 3, and I would write negative for my classification. Okay, that's the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a great afternoon. I will see you guys tomorrow.